President Yoon Suk Yeol is in Lithuania for the annual NATO gathering amid concerns of a broader regional security, while Korea itself played host to delegates from Africa to launch a joint project aimed at addressing the continent's food security. So what is the significance of Seoul's engagement with the world's largest security alliance? And how does the so-called K-Rice Belt project seek to support food security in Africa? Also, is Korea punching below its weight in terms of broader global welfare? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again during which we touch upon Korea-related news that made global headlines as well. For more on this, I have Jack Barton here in the studio. Jack, it's been a while. Welcome back.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I also have Thomas Maresca with us. Thomas, it's good to have you back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Right, so Jack, President Yoon Suk Yeol is making his second consecutive appearance at the annual NATO summit being held in Lithuania this week. What do you suppose is the broader significance of Korea's continuous engagement with NATO?
Well, it's definitely significant. We see this relationship continue to grow under the Yoon presidency. He's made a real push to strengthen ties with the United States, but also NATO, and we've seen an outcome from the meeting already, a strengthening of the partnership in 11 different areas, perhaps most significantly in cybersecurity, cyber warfare, sort of sharing information when it comes to high-tech wares and whatnot. And clearly from South Korea's perspective, the emphasis is on North Korea and bringing NATO deeper into the fold when it comes to dealing with the issue of North Korea's nuclear program. But from NATO's perspective, it's about bringing South Korea deeper into the fold when it comes to Ukraine and doing more about Ukraine. So there is a little bit of a tight walk. We did see that strong statement from NATO again, calling the DPRK's nuclear weapons program unacceptable. But I think that pushes on, for South Korea to do more, to send weapons to Ukraine, something that hasn't directly been doing so far. But it has sent parts, and it has sent sort of weapons to other countries like artillery to the United States, which then sends it to Ukraine. So South Korea really doing a bit of a delicate dance, I think. Not trying to please everyone, but getting closer with NATO, getting closer with the United States, and at the same time, keeping a relationship with Russia. Remember, it still imports oil and petrol, less of it, but it doesn't go along with the sanction. It actually imports more coal now from Russia than at the beginning of the war. So this delicate dance, but as a part of that, this is real. That strengthening of the relationship with NATO, it's real, and there are tangible results coming from it.
Right. And Thomas, prior to his departure, President Yoon Suk Yeol called for a greater commitment against North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions. Do you suppose Pyongyang's persistent provocations, Thomas, has perhaps provided South Korea with a greater platform to better engage with its global partners, given the shared concern over security?
Absolutely. I mean, as we saw today, North Korea sent a message of its own right on the, perhaps timed a bit to the NATO meeting. But yeah, I think clearly there's a very tangible case to be made. Not just North Korea, the number of provocations from North Korea, but the actual quality of them. I think it's clearer and clearer to the rest of the world the actual threat that North Korea is posing, and the sophistication of the types of weapon systems that it's showing the world. So I think the threat is more real, and you can certainly make that case from Yoon's perspective that NATO and the allies should be on board with a security partnership. And I think to touch on the Ukraine issue that is sort of hovering above this whole meeting. Ukraine, in a way, is an object lesson in what happens, how a regional conflict, can spill over into the rest of the globe. And I think Yoon can clearly point to that and say, what happens here, we can already see the spillover effects all over the world. And so some of the things Jack mentioned, even in issues of cybersecurity, I mean, supply chains, those sorts of things. So I think, it's a talking point or an agenda point for the Yoon administration to forward their goals, but it's not something that's kind of being made up out of thin air. And I think the rest of the world, I mean, sometimes North Korea does still seem a bit of a remote issue, but I think, more and more we're seeing just the interconnectivity of, its role in the geopolitical stage.
Right. And before we continue talking about North Korea, Jack, Ukraine, as you and both Thomas mentioned, it has been dominating talks at NATO this year as well. Now, President Yoon has pledged tangible post-war reconstruction efforts with regard to Ukraine. Do you believe Korea has much to offer in terms of post-war reconstruction?
Yeah, I think Korea has a lot to offer. Obviously, European countries will take the lead, given that Ukraine is in their neighborhood, but I think South Korea can still play a very strong role. Has the unique experience, as do some European countries, of basically being rubble at the end of a war and then building up a very strong economy and a public housing sector from a state-led perspective after that war. So South Korea has a lot of experience in that and of doing it really well, of smart cities. They're also talking about IT traffic control. They're talking about the industrial complex. There's a plan already being drawn up, memorandums of understanding for South Korea to help rebuild the energy sector. There's conventional energy within there. There's even plans for hydrogen. There's plans for 2 nuclear power plants. All of this is sort of billions of dollars. But it's all a matter really of when. When could this possibly happen? For instance, there's one agreement with Poland to help rebuild Mariupol. Well, that's still firmly in Russian hands. And the counteroffensive, as much as, a lot of people hype it up a little bit, it's not going that well. And Mariupol is still firmly in Russian hands, as are a lot of the areas where there are plans for the redevelopment. So this war could take years. And a lot of that redevelopment and reconstruction may be years away in the implementing. But certainly, if the will is still there from South Korea, I think South Korea, the experience that South Korea can bring to the table, would be critical.
Right. And talking about South Korea bringing things to the table, Thomas, this week here in Seoul, there were efforts to help Africa secure food, and Korea recently sealed a very comprehensive deal with, I believe, 8 countries in Africa as part of efforts to bolster their food security. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so Monday, Seoul signed a memorandum of understanding with 8 African countries, the K-Rice Belt project. It's not quite as catchy as K-pop or K-drama, but it's a branding thing, I guess. But basically, the agreement says Korea will deliver high-yield rice varieties to these different African countries, kind of tailored to the environment of each one, machinery, tech experience, and the 8 countries you mentioned. It's Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Cameroon, Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, and Guinea-Bissau. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the plan is to grow around 2,000 tons of rice in Africa this year. That will go up to 10,000 tons by 2027, which they say is enough to feed 30 million people a year there. Generally speaking, it falls into this, the Yoon administration has made a point of this, of kind of saying that South Korea wants to step up and take a more active role worldwide. I mean, some of what Jack mentioned too about Korea having this experience to draw on. I mean, South Korea is a country, I think the only country still that went from an aid recipient to an aid donor. So there is an interesting space for Korea to bring, its own lessons from, developing its economy from a really, poor position to, where it is now. And that, that makes a sort of a logical sense. Just as a kind of a global issue, I mean, food security certainly emerged as a major issue in the last few years with supply chain disruptions. I mean, certainly Africa, I think they only grow about 60% themselves, within the continent of the demand there. So there is a need for greater, food capacity on its own. And, so it fits into this sort of sphere of Korea also trying to have an influence on various sectors. I think generally Korea announced earlier this year they're going to double their agricultural ODA, or overseas development aid budget by 2027. So that's been kind of in the works and working at different parts of the world with sort of tailored solutions. I mean, Korea is going to bring some tech solutions, I think some like smart farming types of initiatives to Asia. So there's a variety of planes on which South Korea can try to
Right,
have
indeed.
an impact. Yeah.
And against this backdrop, Jack, there are some who claim that Korea has been punching below its weight in terms of better or broader global welfare. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know about that. You know, Korea's a two-track economy, has very advanced export sector, but also it's still, in many ways, at the domestic element, is still a developing economy, and it has been deeply involved with aid projects over the years, often under the radar. It has its own economic cooperation and development fund here. You know, and over the past decade or so, it spent billions of dollars, I think, on around 500 projects in 50 different countries around the world. It just often doesn't make a big hoopla about it. But South Korea is already contributing a lot, and as Thomas said, there are plans to really upscale that. And I think this kind of assistance, such as the project in Africa, this is money well spent, where you're not providing food, you're setting up the infrastructure for agriculture in the country. But sometimes it needs to be a little bit more holistic. So there's not much point setting up a great agriculture sector if you're not fixing the infrastructure to go with it. Because if you can't get that product to market on dirt roads or bad, you know, often this is a situation. So you need to take a broader look. And if the agriculture sector is normally bad, so too is the infrastructure. But I think this is a great start. It's I think an intelligent way to go about it, and if South Korea keeps building on this approach, you're going to get way more bang for your buck than if you're just sort of, you know, handing out assistance, which is still badly needed in many places. Right. But yeah, I see this as a positive trend and going in the right direction.
I believe the wisdom of the words is that you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly.
Right, Thomas, back in Europe, now President Yoon is poised to fly into Poland this week as well. Some scholars say that Korea should seek to strengthen its relationship with middle powers. And that being said, what are your thoughts on the potential influence of middle powers amid this current climate of geopolitical tensions?
Yeah, well, you know, from Korea's perspective, I mean, it does make a lot of sense. It follows a little bit on what we've been talking about. But, you know, I mean, first of all, Korea, Yoon going to Poland, I mean, Poland has become a great partner for some, you know, of these segments of the economy that Korea is really trying to develop. I mean, it's a big weapons purchaser, and, you know, some nuclear power projects are in the works. So, you know, we're seeing how, you know, this is fitting into the, you know, the Korean economy's development. And yeah, I think as far as middle powers, you know, Korea has a lot to offer on its own to trading partners around the world. I mean, from just technology to this defense sector to cultural and business opportunities. And, you know, I think within this, it's still, you know, this bipolar superpower great conflict of the US and China. And so for countries to be able to maneuver, and Korea's, I think, well positioned to be able to kind of maneuver in between that space and not be too, I mean, clearly Korea is aligned more strongly with the US, but it's not seen as, you know, a vassal state of the US, and can you know, can sort of present an independent way for other countries to sort of try to navigate this, you know, overarching conflict between these two powers. And Korea offers a lot in terms of just being a good partner to work with. You know, it's a democratic country. It's not, you know, hegemonic in any way. And, you know, even, you know, for countries that are choosing who to do business with, I mean, China offers a lot, but also carries with it a lot of, you know, problems or issues, and the U.S. as well. I mean, I was thinking of, you know, when French President Macron was in Beijing a few months ago, and he made this point of sort of saying, oh, you know, Europe is not a vassal state of the U.S. And that, you know, that does play, I think, domestically in a lot of countries. Like, a lot of countries don't want to be seen as just marching in step with the U.S. So I think Korea can operate in that space. Korea and other middle powers can really try to find some room to operate within that space. And, you know, perhaps as the world is also bifurcating into this kind of authoritarian regimes versus democratic regimes, I mean, those teams are kind of filling out, and Korea can sort of operate within that, you know, kind of democratic, liberal world order, but not only as a, you know, sort of puppet of the U.S. to say.
Right. Meanwhile, Jack, on the domestic front, back on Monday, I believe, South Korea celebrated its 24th anniversary of the opening of a center here in the country to help North Korean defectors better settle into South Korea. It's called the Hanawon. Have you heard of it, Jack?
I've heard of it. I've never been
right?
down there, but I've seen the photos.
Right, you have.
But, yeah.
What are your thoughts, generally speaking, about the efforts of Hanawon?
You know, it's, of course, looking at it and looking at the photos, and when you think about it, there's something slightly Orwellian about the whole process, but how could you do it any other way? In a way, you know, if I think back to Germany, when Germany was divided, well, the economy in North Korea is 18 times poorer than East Germany at the time, and yet here we are more than 30 years later. After unity, the Germans just still completely different people. They look at each other, East and West, and it's almost... So you have this huge cultural divide, this massive amount of culture shock when people turn up from North Korea in South Korea, and there needs to be this decompression chamber or this cushion, this retraining center. Is it ideal? I don't know. I couldn't be the judge of that, but it's definitely necessary. I would say it's probably necessary as well to have more follow-up. I know volunteers play a big, strong role when the North Koreans leave there. But that probably 3 months is not enough, given the huge shock they would have. And we know there's a lot of issues. Many want to go back because it's just too much. It's overwhelming. We know the suicide rate is much higher amongst North Korean defectors than the normal, South Korean public. And yeah, so I think this work is critical. Perhaps there needs to be more of it. But it also needs to be coupled, I think, with a change of perception in South Korea, and maybe a little bit more of an embrace of North Korean defectors. I don't think it's any secret that they sort of get treated like second-class citizens and face a lot of discrimination. So for all the talk of wanting reunification, it'd be nice if that could translate perhaps into a more welcoming atmosphere for people that actually go through hell and back to get out of North Korea and into South Korea.
Right, well, the Unification Ministry here actually did speak about trying to foster a social environment that is more understanding about the hardships of the North Korean defectors here in the country. Also on the peninsula, Thomas, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, earlier this week, she spoke about American forces violating the airspace of North Korea, especially above its exclusive economic zone, that is. And pundits earlier talked about how this may be a setup, a pretext to paving the path to more provocations. We saw one earlier on this Wednesday morning. What are your thoughts? Are we looking at more later this month, especially in line with the so-called Victory Day?
I mean, that's certainly a target on the calendar that I think analysts and observers are looking at. But it's really hard, I think, to draw a straight line ever between what North Korea is saying and what they do or when exactly they do it. So, but clearly, I mean, the statements of Kim Yo-jong are of a part with this entire narrative that North Korea has long been espousing, but has really been pushing alongside all of its weapons tests of recent months and years, which is, the threat that is being posed by the U.S. and South Korea. So everything that North Korea is doing, they are framing as a response to, the threats from U.S. and South Korean joint military exercises. I mean, along with Kim Yo-jong's statement, the Defense Ministry also had issued a statement around that same day or on Monday that was talking about the spy plane missions, but also made a big point about the U.S. nuclear ballistic missile submarine that is supposed to come to South Korea at some undetermined point. Framing that as this nuclear provocation that the U.S. was doing. So, I mean, it's clearly that's the whole sort of message that North Korea is sending to the world, probably to some extent domestically. And interestingly, though, I mean, in recent months, we've seen China and Russia kind of echo this framing in the UN Security Council resolutions. Russia and China have just sort of blocked those from anything happening around North Korea. And the rationale they've always given is kind of in line with what North Korea has said, that Russia and China are half blaming it on the provocations of the U.S. being here and conducting military exercises. And it's a little bit like the way Ukraine says it had to invade Russia because NATO was coming and pushing at our borders. So it's like a rhetorical framework for what they're doing. And I think clearly, whether or not anyone buys it or thinks it's justified, I mean, that in itself is clearly a message of the direction that they're heading and their intentions.
Right. Jack, moving forward, back here on the Korean, in South Korea that is, it has been reported that child care centers here in the country, Jack, are being replaced by homes for the elderly. What do you propose? I understand this is a tough question, but what do you propose to perhaps better deal with the shrinking and aging population here in the country?
Yeah, this is a big problem here. It's not a little one. It's I think from 2017 down from 40,000 to 31,000, and elderly care jumping from 76 to 90,000. And it's not just here, of course, Japan, China, even Russia and Ukraine. People are wondering what will the impact of the death of hundreds of thousands of young men in these countries suffering the same problem. Here in Korea, President Yoon's pointed out that 200 billion has been spent over the last 16 years trying to solve this problem. I think the reality is you have very high housing costs. You have huge pressure of education. If you have children, it's incredibly expensive with the tutoring. The work hours here are very long. I mean, basically everything is set up to make it, even if you really want to have children, it's a big question mark. You have to say, can we do this? And the problem is, the answer is to alleviate all of that, but it comes at a time when there is economic problems, when even though the real estate market has dipped, prices still remain higher than before they dipped. The cost of education continues to soar. So all of the elements that have created the problem are either intensifying or staying the same. So unfortunately, I don't really see a big cure for this. Society is just going to have to adapt. And Japan, which started doing this a little bit earlier, I've been there and interviewed people in their 80s working at McDonald's, because they say, well, we'd rather do this and be retired, and society is going to have to change. Maybe there'll be a miracle, maybe something's going to change, but no, I don't see a miracle cure in the next decade or so.
Right. So for the time being, we just need to adapt to the situation, make the best out of it then.
Yeah.
All right, Jack, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Thomas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Do join us again same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.